Earlier today, President Donald Trump tweeted about his controversial policy plan to impose tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, saying, quote, "Trade wars are good and easy to win." The tweets were in reference to his announcement Thursday that the U.S. would levy tariffs of 25% on imported steel and 10% on imported aluminum. Yesterday's announcement by Mr. Trump tanked global financial markets and created backlash from around the world and right here in the U.S. from some within the president's own political party. Republican Senator Ben Sasse said trade wars are never won. Trade wars are lost by both sides. And make no mistake, if the president goes through with this, it will kill American jobs. That's what every trade war ultimately does. So much losing. The president, however, remains unnerved, tweeting, "We must protect our country and our workers." And for the latest developments from around the globe on this, our RT correspondents, Alex Mihailovich, who joins us from Toronto, and Caleb Maupin, who joins us from New York. Thank you both for being here. Alex, let's start with you. We've talked about trade a bunch of times, and it seems that what's happening when you listen to Wilbur Ross, the U.S. Commerce Secretary, is that no nation will be spared, including our very friendly neighbors to the north. What are they saying up there, Alex?
Well, I mean, the trade tariffs of this sort would be devastating for Canada, actually. And here, let's look at the numbers. The graphs tell it. The pictures tell it all. If you're looking at the oil, or sorry, not oil, I should say steel, first of all, Canada, the biggest exporter to the U.S. when it comes to steel at 16% of what you import. Brazil is at number 13. And if you look at aluminum, well, we're at 54% of your imports of aluminum. So look, if you look at Canada, Canada's already asking in one way or another to be exempt from this, as are Republicans within Trump's inner circle. People see this as bad business. Now, there's a bigger story here. I mean, Canada and the U.S., these industries are tied together quite tightly, first of all. And second of all, guess what? We import American steel in Canada. We happen to be the #1 importers, and you have a $2 billion surplus when it comes to steel and trade with Canada. So this does not make any logical sense, at least from a Canadian point of view.
Don't confuse us with the facts, Alex. We have to worry about those sometimes. Now, Caleb, you are sort of our resident expert on all things China and Asia. Tell us about China in that it is a large steel producer, I think one of the largest steel producers, but also a big importer into the U.S. What's the circumstance there?
Well, at this point, the fallout with China has implications not just for China, not just for Canada or Germany, but also for the United States. I mean, we've heard Senator Pat Roberts from Kansas speaking up about how all over farm country across the United States, folks are not happy about these tariffs. Why? Well, we've just had a huge breakthrough. At this point in the United States, the agricultural sector has signed billion-dollar deals to start selling agricultural products, beef, all kinds of farm products to China. And now with these tariffs, that's in question. China could retaliate. All across the Midwest, you have Chinese corporations opening up manufacturing jobs in places like Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin. A lot of the Midwest of the United States is not happy about having a potential falling out or trade war with China. It's just not something they see as being in their economic interest.
Now, let me ask you both, but I'll stick with you just at first, Caleb. So the president, when he came out yesterday, President Trump came out and he didn't give all of the details. We got the 25% on steel, we got the 10% on aluminum, but he said, well, it remains to be seen, whether or not every country will be included. And it remains to be seen whether or not there's some companies which may be able to seek exemptions. But then Wilbur Ross, the Commerce Secretary, today came out and said, no country will be exempted. And that's what the president wants to do. But we really haven't heard it from the president himself. And we know he's vassal, I guess, at best, on some of these things. So, Caleb, you first. What should we believe?
Well, let's look at the former steel manufacturing centers of the United States. You got places like Gary, Indiana. You've got places like Youngstown, Cleveland. Observers look at these cities and they say, you know, if you want to revive these cities that have been just devastated by the decline of the steel industry, it's going to take a lot more than just a tariff. And at this point, China's economy is probably one of the fastest growing in the entire world. You know, they have a GDP growth rate of roughly 6.9% this coming years. Our GDP growth rate's only about between 2 or 3%. They're really the fastest moving train at this point, and they do have some of the fastest trains in the world. And why wouldn't we want to be on board? Why would we want to, as a country, you know, put up a barrier between ourselves and the rapidly growing Chinese economy? 700 million people lifted out of poverty, cell phone manufacturing, a lot of growth going on in China, and a trade war has the potential to essentially cut the United States off from a booming center on the global economy.
Yeah, although it seemed like the president didn't really care about Asia when he got out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But yeah, I understand, Caleb. Alex, what do you think about, what do you make of, you know, the seemingly, potentially at least contradictory messages coming out of the administration? Because we do hear about Gary Cohen, the director of the National Economic Council, saying, people reporting that this may be it for him, that if the president goes through with this, he may be gone. He's done tax reform, and this could be a final straw. Who knows if that's the case, but what are we to believe by the president's spokespeople on this?
Look, the target is China, first of all. According to the World Bank, 5.1% of trade with the United States and China deals with metals. So you're hitting the wrong sector if you really want to do damage to China. And you believe me, you don't want to have a trade war with China. I don't know what would happen in Walmart if you didn't have Chinese products in there. Second of all, you got Europe standing by. They've already threatened to put tariffs up not only on metals, but on food and other products. And there goes that sector of the economy. Never mind that aluminum would become more expensive and steel in the United States. And who pays for that? That's the American people in the end. Cars are more expensive. Your beer cans are more expensive. And if you add food into that, well, beer's going to go skyrocketing through the roof. And that would tick off people like me and you possibly if you can't get a can of beer for the right price. Bottom line here, this is not making a lot of sense. If you're talking about the U.S. trade deficit, it's about just under $600 billion a year. Why isn't the United States looking at its national debt of $21 trillion a year when you have $21 trillion missing from your own government? That's where the money is, not here in the steel industry and the aluminum industry.
And Caleb, to Alex's point about the debt, the $20+ trillion in debt, 20% of that $20 trillion is held by China. So this is something we need to be concerned about on a number of fronts. Let me just ask you, Caleb, do you see this being resolved, or you think the president's really going to go forward with it? Because it sounds like a train wreck about to occur if he goes forward.
Well, let's take an honest look at the steel industry itself. Now, if you're an honest observer of what's gone on in the steel sector, you'll know that the biggest jobs killer in the steel industry is not imports from China or imports from Canada. The biggest job killer in the steel industry is automation. At this point, it's exponentially lower the number of steel workers you need to run a steel mill. I mean, there's just a far, far lower number of workers needed in the manufacturing sector. Now, the billionaire from Alibaba, Jack Ma, the Chinese high-tech billionaire, he often has pointed out, he says that where trade stops, the world stops. And essentially, if you look at what's going on here, there's a strange conversation that people are having. I mean, what's really the source of the loss of jobs in the steel industry? Is it the fact that China is producing so much steel? Is that really what's causing people to lose jobs? Now, why are we not exploring other industries? You know, we talk about the computer manufacturing, you know, some of the high tech that's going on here in the world. Why are we not putting money into research and development? That has been one of the secrets of China's success over the past few decades, is they put a huge amount of government funds into research and development, and to moving ahead with artificial intelligence and new fields that would create new jobs in a 21st century economy where manufacturing jobs and working on the assembly line isn't exactly realistic for growth.
Yeah, you're right. China's building that $2.1 billion AI center in Beijing. Alex, we don't have time right now to continue, but I imagine you would agree that this is going to also create a lot of waves with regard to NAFTA, right?
bad news for everybody. I mean, the last time something like this was attempted was during the time of Richard Nixon, and we know what happened then. Trade wars are not good. NAFTA right now, as it stands, is up in the air, so this is obviously going to send ripples through those negotiations as well. But both you and I talked about this. I would not be surprised if the president steps back once again from things that he said, and we might see a totally different story coming up next week.
RT correspondents Alex Mihailovich and Caleb Maupin, thank you both for your time.